What I'd like to do now is turn to the second major Reagan-Udall Foundation project, an ongoing project on the critical path to TB drug regimens, and Alicia Chow and Jane Reese-Colburn are going to do an update on this project.
Thank you, Mark. And again, can you all hear me? Okay, great. My name is Alicia Chow. I'm the project manager, and I primarily work on this critical path to TB tuberculosis drug regimens project at Reagan-Udall. So this is our global health project, and for a little bit of background on tuberculosis, though it's often considered a disease of the past, 8.8 million people develop TB annually, and it kills 1.4 million annually. And so there's an urgent need for new therapies and particularly combination regimens to treat this. So some of the problems with existing treatments, one is their age. So the majority of the current first-line treatments for TB are close to 50 years old. And they have significant side effects and are just very long courses of treatment, and they're very intensive with significant side effects. And there's also been an increase in the drug-resistant and multi-drug-resistant TB, which makes some of these older drugs a problem. So moving forward into what exactly the critical path to TB drug regimens initiative is. So I have the mission here, but really this initiative was founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the TB Alliance, and the Critical Path Institute, and the Reagan-Udall Foundation came on as a partner. And so the basic mission of this initiative is to serve as a partnership to bring together leaders of the global health community, regulatory agencies, civil society organizations, and pharmaceutical and other drug developers to support advances in regulatory science and the development of infrastructure to facilitate the development and availability of new TB drug treatments, and specifically focusing on novel combination TB drug regimens. So again, while there have, while there's been some recent developments in the TB drug field, some of these, the needs that I have, challenges that I outlined before, make this initiative really important. So to kind of describe the CPTR a little bit more, there's three main arms of this initiative. So there's the Regulatory Science Consortium, the TB Drugs Coalition, and the Research Resources Group. So Reagan-Udall's role, our primary focus in the CPTR is in this Research Resources Group, and here I've outlined some of the primary focus areas that this Research Resources Group works in. So again, this arm is primarily tasked with developing tools and resources to increase the likelihood of successful TB drug development by creating a framework and infrastructure to support the development of TB drugs. Within this work group, Reagan-Udall supports and manages three main work groups. So these are the Stakeholder and Community Engagement Work Group, the Global Regulatory Pathways Work Group, and the Access and Appropriate Use Work Group. So just from those names, it can kind of give you an idea of what the focus of some of those groups are, but they tie into the key areas of focus that I've outlined here. So ensuring ethical practices and processes in TB research, identifying resource needs and funding, global regulatory pathways harmonization, identifying challenges in the current existing regulatory processes, promoting community and stakeholder engagement, and then working towards access and appropriate use of new TB drugs and regimens. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of the updates for our specific work groups, key accomplishments from the past year. So the Stakeholder and Community Engagement Work Group is managed and chaired by the Reagan-Udall Foundation. So last year we were excited to release the Good Participatory Practice Guidelines, shortened GPP, for TB drug trials. So we developed this in collaboration with AVAC. They are an HIV advocacy group, and they initially developed a GPP focused on HIV prevention trials. So we released this document in October of last year. And so the basic premise for this document is to serve as a framework for how to really set up community engagement programs and outline good practices for researchers and clinical trial staff to engage with the patients and communities in which they're doing clinical research in. So as an add-on to this, we've continued to kind of promote the Good GPP document. Sorry. And so this led to collaborating to develop a manuscript engaging communities in tuberculosis research. This was published in the Lancet Infectious Disease in an online edition in March of this year, and it will be released in the upcoming June print edition of Lancet Infectious Disease. And as we continue to kind of expand and develop the awareness for the need for community engagement and the need for funding to be specifically allocated to community engagement work, where the Stakeholder and Community Engagement Work Group will be hosting a workshop in collaboration with AVAC again at the upcoming Union World Conference on TB and Lung Health. This workshop will tie in closely with the themes that we outlined in our Lancet paper, focusing on the concepts, value, and practice of community engagement. Moving to the next work group. So the Global Regulatory Pathways Work Group is managed by the Reagan-Udall Foundation. So in October of last year, we co-hosted a satellite meeting at the 2012 International Conference of Drug Regulatory Authorities with the WHO. The session was called New TB Drugs on the Horizon, Regulatory Strategies and Opportunities. So this meeting brought together regulatory professionals from 23 different countries, primarily focusing on regions that have a high multi-drug resistant and extremely drug resistant TB population. And it focused on the current landscape of new TB treatments and regimens, and also the concept of regulatory science harmonization. So really looking at getting input on, the concept of harmonizing regulatory processes across different countries. Thinking that would help enable faster approvals. And some of the planned work for this group, we're organizing a regulatory panel session at the upcoming October annual workshop for CPTR, where we, again, are bringing in some representatives from hybrid and TB countries to discuss the challenges faced in their specific countries in regulating and approving new drugs, new TB drugs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane to give an update for the Access and Appropriate Use Work Group.
We participated in a WHO task force meeting a couple of weeks ago in Geneva to look at new policies for treatment in tuberculosis with Janssen's new drug, which is the first one in, 30 years, 50 years? There are a lot of issues. People are not used to how to roll out a new drug, how to deal with some of the safety concerns, and then this was also an accelerated approval drug, so there are a lot of issues. And so we met with a fairly large group, actually there were probably 30 people, and we're working on together, collaborating on policies about how to roll out some of these drugs into other countries. Now that it's been approved in the U.S., there are all sorts of expanded access and compassionate use programs that people have in mind to bring these drugs to some particularly countries that have, as Alicia said, multi-drug resistant TB. And so the bottom line for us is that one of the things it looks like we're probably going to do, and we're in discussions right now, is collaborate with the WHO to not only create a compassionate use policy or a guidance. We'll work with them and a lot of the other partners, but the other part is we're exploring the idea of a multi-stakeholder pharmacovigilance meeting, probably would be held at FDA, and we've been talking to folks there, obviously, to look at how do you actually put together a pharmacovigilance plan to roll out a new TB drug, given all of the issues in the 22 high-burden TB countries. So we've been talking with the NIH, FDA, WHO, and others, and we think Reagan-Udall might make sense to be the group that actually pulls this together and starts to work on this particular plan. So it's only been, I think, 2 weeks since we had our initial meeting, but you'll see more about that or hear more about that on our website as that progresses. I think with that, we'll take any questions you have about the TB project, if you have any.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. Jane, any other comments from board staff?
Tachi might. Yeah.
Tachi, you've been involved in this effort. Any comments from you?
No, I think this is a very important initiative of the Gates Foundation. The reality was that if we went through the standard regulatory pathways, it would take 20 years before a new triple drug regimen was possible. And working very closely with the FDA, we figured out a way forward, and we weren't quite sure what the vehicle for funding would be, but the Reagan-Udall Foundation turned out to be a perfect vehicle for this. And at the time, we were a little bit concerned because the RUF wasn't appropriately staffed up, but I think our grant helped the Reagan-Udall Foundation actually gear up to do projects like this, and I think it's moving forward very well right now.
Thanks for the comment. Let me ask any comments or questions from any of you here today on this project. Okay. Well,